I had a couple of comments, a lot of which was covered in the last 5 minutes. But to begin with, first, I totally endorse the 8-foot wall, 8-foot fences should be just allowed straight up. I find it, having tooled down Treat Boulevard any number of times, you could tell where Walnut Creek starts and Concord ends because the wall goes up 2 more feet. Having rented a house at one point at opposite Countrywood Shopping Center before there was an 8-foot fence, an 8-foot wall, when it was a wooden fence, I am totally in support of 8-foot walls on major highways, and I believe they should be allowed without permits. Which brings me also into another issue. We talk about incentives for good business practices. One of the biggest disincentives is having to go through a permit policy, having to go through the entire hoops and whistles. I would suggest that we consider, as one of the biggest incentives we could find, is that if someone isn't compliant with our sign code, they do not need a permit. How's that for an incentive? Amongst the things that I've found recently and in the last few years on our sign codes that have caused problems is things such as there was a church near my house, which was a Lutheran church. It changed from that denomination. The city wanted $1,500 for it to change its sign. I believe that such things need to be stopped. I believe that if we have Tower records and now it's Rasputin records, we shouldn't need to get a new permit to put Rasputin instead of Towers. Or if BevMauve now becomes BevLess, again, we should not need to go through the permit process. These are the ways we can incentivize our people. Another question I had that came up on walls and versus wooden fences, the recent was a situation where I believe there was a gas station that was a Shell station and was reactivated as a Shell station after about 2 years of being shallow. There was a wooden fence behind it. Apparently, the owner was then required to put in a stone fence. Something like this needs to have a little flexibility. If there's a wooden fence now, and there's no basic change in the commercial entity, while we can agree that we all like stone fences, I think that we need to be flexible in not so much the grandfathering in, but allowing an existing fence to remain where the same uses are being in place. On our signs, I am totally with the comments here in regard to the flags that are being used. We need to have something to cover them. The flags are not only being placed in the ground, right at street edge, but they're also being placed on top of buildings. As you can go down Meadow Lane, you'll see they're extending way above the scope of the buildings. On the issue of the human signs, sign spinners, I think is exactly what they're called in the advertising world. None of us were really prepared for this when this code was written, even though it goes back to the 1800s, the guys walking down with barrels and little A-frames on themselves, advertising haircut and a beer for 2 bits, kind of thing. I think that we should have something more vague in terms of our human signage that covers us, saying where there is a safety concern. And the reason I bring this up is in your current code where you define non-commercial code, non-commercial signs, you talk about advocacy. As you go down today, this day, on Clayton Road where it intersects 242, there's 2 gentlemen there with hand signs urging people to pray for the United States. First Amendment speech or a case of human signs of a non-commercial sign, a basis as defined under your code. I believe that if we had in our codes for signs, human signs, we've left it as where the signs represent physical or health safety issues, such as someone spinning a sign at 30 miles an hour and jerking back and forth and making one if he is having an epileptic fit, which happens generally between 12 and 2 o'clock on Port Chicago Highway by a Round Table Pizza that shall remain nameless. We can then have some flexibility. I would also advise you on one policy, somewhat constitutional issue. I am very much opposed to us writing code and municipal regulations with the concept that we are not going to enforce them. Or let's just leave them there, and when we need them, we'll enforce them. We have a policy in this country which says that no state shall make or enforce any law without equal protection under the law. If you're not going to enforce it, don't put it in here. I don't want a situation, I don't want to be here on either side of this microphone and then find someone come up here and say, well, this code enforcement cop came to me and said, I can't have this sign here, but 5 weeks ago it was okay with this guy, or we never enforced this, but now suddenly, you know, what, you don't like my Asian American left-handed blonde-haired dyed sign maker? Is this discrimination against me? We can't do that. I would urge you always, whenever you hear from either side of the aisle the terms that, well, we don't enforce it, that's code for you to immediately cross it off, redline it out of here, because that's the kind of flexibility that has gotten our country into trouble year after year, going back. Rules that are assigned, oh, we'll only enforce it this time. And then we have to figure out who they're enforcing it against, or who they're enforcing it for, as the case may be. So again, on the sign issues, I would also like to focus, noticing that there's no great line behind me, on section page 6 of 32, basically non-commercial signs consistent with the following requirements. I believe this is under exempt signs within limits. Basically, this is our election code signage, where it says during the period 75 days prior to an election day, and blah, blah, blah.
Another minute if we could.
Huh?
How much time? We need about another minute here?
Okay, yeah, this will be the last shot.
All right, great.
We should specify that this is election code signage so that it doesn't get confused under your definition of non-commercial sign with basic advocacy and other things. Also, I would strongly urge that you reduce the sign from 32 square feet, I would love it to be 16 square feet, or as Walnut Creek has it, down to 24 feet. So instead of 8x4s, you have 6x4s. Personally, as many of us who are forced into the political business, signs are still political blight, which we have to, and anything we can do that can restrict it would be better. I also would like to see possibility of a bond placed that would be forfeit if the signs are not removed, or a reasonable attempt being made to remove the signs within 10 days of it. Additionally, instead of 75 days, I would urge that you say that for cases of an election in November, that the first Monday in September be the earliest that the signs could go up, or that weekend, or September 1st, so that we don't have signs going up in the middle of August for a November election, since tradition has been that it's Labor Day. Let's put the tradition in the code. And again, I would urge that you reduce the size of the signs. In fact, I would have no problem advocating that the sign of a lawn sign would be the maximum size allowed, which I believe is 3 feet by 2 feet. And thank you.